Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a literal political showdown, one of the most dramatic and pivotal in modern South Asian history. We're zooming in on a make-or-break moment where the future of British India was completely hanging in the balance, and its leaders tried to write their own rules for governance.
The year is 1928. The challenge on the table? Absolutely massive. They needed to draft a constitution that could somehow satisfy a giant, incredibly diverse subcontinent. It was supposed to be this master plan for unity, but, spoiler alert, as we'll see, the very attempt to bring everyone together ironically ended up pushing them further apart. Let's dive in.
Part 1. The Quest for Unity. To really get why everything fell apart, we first have to look at the sheer ambition behind getting everyone at the same table in the first place. Just look at the sheer speed of this political roller coaster. It's crazy. We kick off with the hopeful Muslim League's Delhi proposals in 1927, and boom, early 1928, the Nehru Committee is formed. By August, they've already drafted a report. But then December hits at the Calcutta All-Parties Conference, and the cracks really start showing. Fast forward to March 1929, and it's a total breakdown. This entire rise and fall unfolded in barely 2 years.
To pull this off, an absolute powerhouse of a committee was formed in February 1928. Chaired by Motilal Nehru, it was stacked with brilliant political minds, titans of South Asian politics, really, like Jawaharlal Nehru, Subhash Chandra Bose, Tej Bahadur Sapro, and Ali Imam. This wasn't just some casual working group, you know. They carried the enormous burden of drafting a unanimous vision for a self-governing India, which honestly makes their ultimate failure to agree even more shocking.
Moving right along to Part 2, Inside the Nehru Report. What did this committee actually propose to the British, and, more importantly, to their own people?
Well, the resulting document, the Nehru Report, boldly laid out exactly 19 fundamental rights for the people of India. 19. For 1928, throwing down a highly structured, bold demand like that was practically revolutionary.
And we aren't just talking about basic administrative tweaks here. These were incredibly progressive ideas. Equal rights for women, universal adult franchise. They explicitly demanded the complete separation of state and religion. Plus, they wanted provinces organized along linguistic lines. They were literally trying to forge a modern secular nation from scratch, demanding self-governing dominion status, meaning they wanted to run their own affairs while still technically being under the umbrella of the British Crown.
Now, here's the tricky part: how they tried to balance that unified vision with minority protection. The old setup kept communities in completely separate voting lanes, known as separate electorates. The Nehru Report wanted to scrap that and mix everyone into a joint electorate system. But to protect Muslim religious and cultural interests, they baked in guaranteed seat reservations at the center and in specific provinces where Muslims were in the minority.
Structurally, they were drawing up a grand new political architecture, a robust federal government. Think of a central Indian parliament with a Senate elected by provincial councils and a House of Representatives elected by everyday adults. At the very top, the Governor General would take advice from an executive council that was fully accountable to this new parliament.
But, yeah, you guessed it. Part 3. The consensus crumbles. Let's see how this beautifully crafted blueprint immediately hit a brick wall of multi-directional opposition.
The historical deadlock here is just fascinating. I mean, how do you please everyone when their demands perfectly contradict each other? On one end, the Hindu Mahasabha demanded a strict unitary government and fought the earlier Delhi proposals. Compromises were made to appease them, like keeping residual powers at the center, but those exact concessions instantly alienated the Muslim League, leaving them highly unsatisfied. And meanwhile, the younger Congress leaders were fighting a totally different battle.
Because even within the Congress itself, a massive generational divide blew up. The report was mostly unanimous, except for one glaring issue. The older, majority section wanted dominion status, but the younger section, they demanded complete independence, no compromises. To them, dominion status was a major, unacceptable step backward.
These younger leaders were so adamant, they actually broke ranks. Powerhouses like Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose teamed up to set up the Independence for India League, specifically to push for total independence. It just goes to show you exactly how deep the internal fractures had gotten over the report's goals.
Which brings us to the climax of our explainer, Part 4, Jinnah's 14 points. This definitive counterproposal from the Muslim League would alter the political landscape forever.
It's wild because it didn't start as an outright rejection. Back in December 1928, at the Calcutta Conference, Muhammad Ali Jinnah initially just proposed 3 specific amendments to the report.
He asked for one-third representation in the central legislature, proportional reservation in Bengal and Punjab, and residual powers given to the provinces. But the Nehru Report failed to accommodate those suggestions. Annoyed by this, Jinnah's stance hardened fast. By March 1929, he came back swinging with a much more extensive and hardline framework, the 14 points.
At the absolute core of this crisis was a fundamental, irreconcilable debate over power. The Nehru Report insisted on a federal structure where the ultimate residual power, basically the final say on undecided future issues, stayed firmly at the center. Jinnah's first point countered this directly, demanding those residuary powers go strictly to the provinces, giving them a uniform measure of autonomy.
Representation was another huge sticking point. Jinnah explicitly drew a line in the sand. Muslim representation in the central legislature absolutely had to be no less than one-third. And he didn't stop at the legislature. Point 13 demanded this strict one-third quota extend directly into the executive branch, meaning no cabinet, whether central or provincial, could even be formed without a proportion of at least one-third Muslim ministers.
These weren't just random asks, right? Put together, they formed a comprehensive constitutional shield designed to safeguard minority autonomy. Jinnah demanded keeping separate electorates. He introduced a really fascinating 3/4 veto rule, meaning a bill would die if 3/4 of a community's members opposed it for hurting their interests. He demanded that territorial redistributions shouldn't mess with Muslim majorities in Punjab, Bengal, and the NWFP. Throw in the separation of Sindh, specific reforms in Baluchistan, and constitutional safeguards for Muslim culture and religion, it was the whole shebang.
Part 5. A stalled independence. So what is the ultimate takeaway from this intense period of constitutional maneuvering?
Here's the real tragedy of the Nehru Report. In its completely sincere attempt to find a middle ground, it essentially alienated every major political faction in British India. The communal differences just broke the vital unity between the leaders. It failed to satisfy the Sikhs, it failed the Muslim League, and it failed the Hindu Mahasabha.
And the fallout was immense. The demands cemented in 1929 locked the factions into deeply entrenched positions. As our source notes, these 14 points literally became the basis for the future propaganda of the Muslim League, drawing a hard line in the sand that defined the political struggle for decades to come.
So I'll leave you with this. When a master plan for unity fails to satisfy anyone, what happens to the future of the nation? It's a provocative question, but we really have to recognize that the seeds of future divisions were planted right here. A massive effort to draft a progressive, unified constitution shattered against the complex reality of communal anxieties and power struggles. The fractured consensus of 1928 wasn't just a failed report, it was the prologue to the partition of a subcontinent. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this crucial piece of history. Stay curious, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.